So today's theme is expertise. Expertise is essentially the most important variable in all of social communication, right? People who are experts in an area are given more credibility in that area. You know, you're listening to me talking. You paid credit. You paid money to earn credits to listen to me talk about a subject because supposedly I'm an expert. And that expertise is perceived based on sort of my years of schooling and credentials, publications that I have. The university has looked over what I've written and interviewed me and said, okay, well, he knows what he's talking about. Okay, the expertise in terms of the influence matters, but what really matters, right, is the perception of expertise, that you believe someone's an expert. Um, and so that's what this week is about, both how are experts influential, but and why we would care about experts being influential, and then how do we get it so that people are perceived as experts. But we first have to take a step back, and we got to talk about how information goes from the media to people. And the process that follows this is the two-step flow of communication. Now, what the two-step flow of communication is an answer to what sometimes is called the hypodermic needle idea of media. And here's the hypodermic needle version of media. So there's a person and there's media, and the person gets the information from the media. Now, of course, is what happens for some people, right? Some people do watch the news, and that's where they get their news from. When they do read the newspaper, they do go on the internet, and that's where they get the news from. But for most people, this is not how it works. For most people, in most situations, it works via this two-step flow of communication. That there is somebody else who reads the media um, and passes along that information to you. That most of the time you're hearing about the news, you're not hearing it directly from the news media, you're hearing it from a person who saw the reports. Okay? And that person we perceive in many cases to be an expert. And so one of the key questions is this expert really an expert? Actually, the expert isn't an expert. That's not what you would call them in the two-step flow theory. You'd call them an opinion leader. Okay? The person who passes on the information is really an opinion leader. They might be an expert, or they might just really care about politics, and that's why they pay so much attention to the news, right? So they may know a lot about politics, or they may know a little bit about politics and care a lot about politics. Okay, so let's take a step back and let's remember a quote from Rousseau. And that quote is, if, when properly informed, the people to come to its decisions without any communication between its members, the general will would always emerge and the decisions would always be good. So, the key assumption here is, if, when properly informed, the people were to come to its decisions. So, are the people properly informed? Well, that's a tough question. One of the ways that we typically figure out how much information people have of politics is we measure a political knowledge score. Okay, we ask them some questions about politics. You know, who controls the government, who controls the House and the Senate, um, where do these politicians lie on a ideological scale, and can you place the more conservative ones on the conservative end, and the more liberal ones on the liberal end? Do you know who these people are? Who is Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Great Britain? Do you know who Mike Pence is, the Vice President? Do you know who John Roberts is, the Chief Justice of the United States? And so on and so forth. And we can give you a score. And this here is a distribution of political knowledge scores. And what you see is that people who are not interested in politics, some of them do very well, and some of them don't do that well at all. In fact, the most common score is probably getting less than half of the questions right. When we get to somewhat interested, you see this sort of almost what you might call a normal distribution, with a few people getting a lot of the questions right, and some of the people getting most of the questions wrong, and most people getting about half, give or take more, somewhat. The people who are really interested in politics, well, they're skewed to the top end of the score, right? Now, still, most of them are not getting all the questions right, and in fact, most of them are not getting, most of them are getting more than half the questions right, right? So you're seeing there that as interest goes up, so does knowledge. But you do have situations, especially in which people are somewhat interested in politics, okay, who know a lot, and you do get situations in which the people who are interested in politics don't know that much more than the people who are not interested in politics. Okay? So while interest is related to knowledge, they're not quite the same thing. So that brings us back to this two-step flow. The way one would hope this would work is that the media passes information to experts, and the experts passes information on to people who are not experts, right? And that works to the extent that the media passes information on to people who are very interested, and those people who are very interested pass information on to people who are not that interested, right? And the great thing about this is that people who are not that interested can essentially become informed about politics without having to take the time uh, checking out the news, time that they'd rather spend doing other things. We have a lot of things we need to do in life. We'd rather spend time, it'd be better for us to spend time at work or with our families. And so when we have our leisure time, if we're not interested in politics, if we can avoid paying attention to politics, that could be a good thing. So the idea here is that the hope would be that the whole of the electorate is greater than the sum of the parts of the electorate. Okay? And the way this works is via an information shortcut, right? Because of social communication. Because the people who know more and care more pass information on to the people who care less. Now, we must keep that separate from something else that was mentioned before, that is the wisdom of the crowds. The wisdom of the crowds work because errors cancel out, right? The idea here that if you think about that jelly bean, how many jelly beans are in a jar thing, if some people overestimate how many jelly beans are in a jar and other people underestimate how many jelly beans are in the jar, then the average will be correct, right? In the wisdom of the crowds, remember, people are not allowed to talk, right? And people are not allowed to talk for the reason that the information shortcut theory might not work. It's supposed to work, that the media passes information on to experts who passes information on to people who don't care about politics. But remember, the people in the middle of this are not necessarily experts. They're opinion leaders. They want to drive people to their opinions. Okay? They are not reference librarians. So, if the media passes information on to someone who is primarily interested in politics, and the people who are primarily interested in politics have strong biases and preferences for the Democratic or Republican Party, and they pass the information on, then really what you're getting is not a flow of expert information, but a flow of biased information. And so what you see is that the people who are perceived as experts, right, the people who base their information on those experts, their vote decisions don't necessarily line up better with their preferences. They could, but they usually line up better with the preferences of the opinion leader, which is a little concerning if people are not sharing the preferences of their opinion leaders. Right? So what does this all mean? The key points. Opinion leaders are more trusted and they dominate political discussion. They do it for two reasons. Reason number one, they care a lot about politics and that's what they want to talk about. But also, people perceive them as being experts, so they want to get information from them. Okay? But remember, opinion leaders are not experts necessarily. Opinion leaders are interested in politics. They care about politics. And interest and caring is related to knowledge, but it's not a perfect measure of knowledge. They're related, they're not perfect measures. Some people are experts and care a lot. Some people care a lot and they know about the same as the typical person. And then even some know less than the typical person, right? But usually it's they know about the same. So they don't know any more. So there's no reason to talk to them about to get more information. Okay? In fact, actually, right, again, the way you sort of solve this problem, the sort of information shortcut theory really says you're not just finding an expert, but you're finding an expert who has the same preferences as you. Okay, and if you tell people actually that their goal is to get the most accurate information, what they do is they forget about that bit where they're supposed to find the person who has the same preferences as them, and they just search out for the most expert person, right? And the most expert person, again, is trying to persuade you. They are often biased, And so people actually do worse if you say to them, hey, I want you to find out about some candidates and I want you to get the most accurate information as possible. Because then all they consider is the expertise, the expertise, the expertise. But remember, expertise is related to interest. And the other thing to remember is that all of the influence that opinion leaders have is the result of perceived knowledge, not actual knowledge, right? So the key, the most important variable in social communication is perceived expertise. And so what we really need to do is understand how people are perceived to be experts. And so that's what the article that I wrote is about, and the other articles are about sort of the way deliberation can lead to larger opinion things, and how maybe people can use expertise as a substitute, to subsidize their knowledge. Really, if you talk to these people who you perceive as experts, you become more confident in what you're doing, and so that has some benefits. It is more likely that you'll turn out, and if they're a good opinion leader, if they're a good expert, you might also be able to vote in line with your preferences.